Well, thanks for coming. Welcome to Meta Productivity. This is a mini series where we're going to explore the intersection of philosophy and hustle. So, yeah, I'm going to launch into a presentation now. Just feel free to use the chat liberally. It's my best way of getting feedback about how things are going. So I'll keep an eye on it here. But without further ado, let's just jump straight into this. So this is session 2 out of 4. And every week I'm going to summarize the previous week with memes and tweets, okay? So that we kind of compress things and keep everybody on the same page. And really, this is like the whole summary of what we're doing here. There's this realization that the people that are the best at asking why questions tend to not be correlated with the same group of people that, or with the group of people that are good at hustling. So why is it that this Venn diagram is so thin in the middle? Why is it that the most philosophical people tend to struggle with execution and the best hustlers tend to be deeply unexamined? Now, this isn't always the case. Like, we all know exceptions to this, but it's a surprisingly common phenomena. And it's actually quite a painful one because, you want the people that are doing a lot of work to be doing examined work. And you want the really thoughtful people to actually have some of those thoughts realized in the real world. So I think this is a really meaningful problem. And it's something that I've been basically trying to address and wrestling personally with my whole life. So meta productivity is really about this middle. And it's kind of like we're combining the philosopher's why with the hustler's how. And as soon as I say that, I'm reminded of this quote. I'm reading Nietzsche again, so he's like, on my mind. And hands up if you've heard this quote: "He who has a why to live for can bear almost anyhow." So the spirit of this is that if you know your purpose, if you know why you're here, if you know your philosophy, your set of values, then you'll be ready to deal with all the stuff that life has to throw at you, almost all of it. You'll be ready to deal with the material world. Having a strong enough purpose, having a strong enough why helps deal with all the difficulties of life. And I think this is like a very biased perspective. This is what I want to suggest. And this is kind of my way of summarizing what we talked about last week. The philosopher would love to think that once we figure out why, once we come up with all the arguments, then I will be able to do the how. Then I will be able to deal with the challenges of life. And I'd like to update this quote for the modern age, which is basically like what I've observed. I've worked with a lot of people. I do productivity coaching, and I've noticed that it's actually the other way around. So if Nietzsche was alive today and he was a productivity coach, he would say something like, "He who knows how to live can achieve almost any why." Now, both of these are simplifications, but the conceit here is that knowing how really unlocks your ability to realize your purpose, your ability to realize your philosophy. So that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about how to live. And yes, there are perennial answers to this question. There are things that are true for humans across time, but I want to suggest to you that we live in a very strange time right now. So we need to think very deeply about how to live today. So here's another way to think about one of the conclusions from last week. I summarize it in this tweet. Why do so many smart, thoughtful people struggle with execution? Why are the hustlers so unexamined? It has to do with this thing about constraints, and this is going to be relevant today too. Execution requires constraints, and thoughtful people are constantly negotiating them. The more meta you are, the more capable you are of abstraction, the more you're going to be negotiating the rules of the game. And some people, they just don't do that. They just deal with what's in front of them. They don't go up those meta levels and hit the view from nowhere. And so I really like this analogy. It's like playing chess where the rules are changing every move. So, you move your pawn and now it's like checkers, or then it's like backgammon, and then you're playing Uno, or you're not going to win, right? And this is the biggest failure mode for overthinkers and thoughtful people. Okay, so today I'm going to talk about what I think is honestly the highest leverage productivity practice that I can suggest to anybody. And this is called GTD. Some of you may have heard of it. Actually, let me get a show of hands or just like a message in the chat. Like, have you heard of GTD? Do you have any familiarity with it? Okay. So someone's shaking their head, a couple thumbs up. All right. Don't worry. We're going to go over it again, and I'm going to introduce it in my own way. So if you've already read the book and you think you're a GTD master, you'll still learn something new. And if you're new to it, then you'll definitely learn some new things. So last time I split up the presentation component with the practice component. This time I'm going to try to implement it all together. So at moments throughout the presentation, there's going to be opportunities to practice. And then that's going to take like the first half, and the second half we'll get into a Q&A. And I think this will take about half an hour, and then we'll have like 20 minutes for Q&A. And this whole session will go just for an hour, for 60 minutes. But first, before we get into all of this, I want to give like the meta perspective, and I want to challenge you all to think about something and get your fingers ready, because you're going to write answers in the chat, okay? What converts ideas into actions? What is it that takes something from the idea space, the thought, concept, knowledge, theory space, and then converts it into action in the real world? So just start putting your answers in the chat. Energy, like one or two word answers, maybe a sentence. Okay, these are good. Experiment, knowledge of reward, intent. Hands up if you like get kind of the vibe of this question, that this question is like getting at something that is like quite relatable. To me, this represents one of the biggest problems for a lot of people. It's like, why is it that, you read thousands of books and then you only action on like 0.001% of the wisdom in those books? It's a pretty painful realization, right? The answer is probably not more books, right? It almost seems like there's a chasm between ideas and actions. Like there's something that separates these two entities, and we need to find out what that is so we can bridge across the two. And I'm going to suggest a model. Again, this is not, don't get overly technical about this. This is just a model. I found this to be so useful for the people that I've spoken with, and it's very useful for me. The bridge that takes ideas and converts them into action. Someone's requesting control of my screen. Decline. The bridge is decisions. And the reason why I say this is because to me, oh, can you mute yourself? Thank you. To me, this is a separate entity from an idea, and it's a separate entity from an action. Decisions can happen inside you without anything happening in the world, right? Like you can be dealing with all this potential, and then at some point you just make a decision. Nothing's changed in the real world. It's still behind your face, but at the same time, it feels like 50% of your project is complete now. So I just want you to keep this in mind. This is kind of like a high level framing. If it's useful for you, take it. If not, discard it, but it's going to come back in the coming slides. Okay. What the fuck is GTD? What is this thing that people keep talking about, that they say I should learn? What is a weekly review? What does it mean? What is a Todoist? Is this related to Evernote in any way? We're going to answer all those questions. At its simplest, GTD it was written by this guy, David Allen, in the early 2000s. And it's just a system for focusing on what matters most without letting anything fall through the cracks. That's like the simplest one-line definition I have for it. It's just a systematic approach to get both these outcomes. And I want to dwell on this a little bit. Focusing on what matters most is a form of presence. It's a form of mindfulness. We've all been there. It's when there's something in front of you and you're dealing with it, you're changing it, you're doing something with it, but you also know that there's nothing else in the world you'd rather be doing right now. In fact, this is the most important thing. And so you feel very present. Hands up if you know what I'm talking about, like you've been in that state before. I think this is actually a pretty rare state for a lot of people. Some people, they experience it more. But one of the things that allows us to experience this is having confidence that we're not letting anything fall through the cracks. If there's a part of your mind that's thinking, okay, I think this is the most important thing, but there might be like 6 things that are like on fire right now, or I might be ignoring some other important thing. That part of your mind is keeping you from being present. And that's what the promise of GTD is. It says, stress-free productivity. But this is actually, honestly, like the way I think about this is like tantric knowledge work. It's like tantra for, if that means something to you, then go with it. But if it doesn't mean anything to you, ignore it. It's more of a spiritual text is what I mean to say. It's just in the modern world, spiritual texts are presented like this with some like consultant guy in a suit on the front of it. So really it's about being present. It's about being present. Now, when I share this with people, one of the things that people get hung up on is this idea of a system, especially artists and creative types. They're like, oh, I just want to do things intuitively, or how can you have a system when like life is so uncertain, and I always make these plans and then immediately reality hits me and the plans have nothing to do with reality. So what's the point of even making plans? Does anyone resonate with that? It's like you resist having a systematic approach to your day because it's going to fail anyway, right? You can't control the day. So why don't we just vibe? Well, for you, I put this slide. And I think this is kind of funny. I'm not, overly fond of military analogies, but I thought this was so good. What are these guys doing? Can anyone write in the chat what you think these guys are doing? These are they're vibing. Yeah, they're vibing, clearly. These guys are at war, right? And they're strategizing. They're figuring out their plan of attack. They're creating a plan. Yes, Benjamin. And what's interesting is that war is probably the most chaotic, unpredictable, like impossible to plan human activity that we know of. But that doesn't mean that they vibe on the battlefield. That means it's all the more reason to have a plan. So I'm not saying you should look at your day like a military strategist looks at a war, although if that analogy motivates you, take it, please. But I'm not saying you need it. I'm just saying that if in other areas of life, whenever there's uncertainty, and in fact, most of it is uncertainty and stuff you can't plan for, that is more incentive to plan. Oh, we gotta maybe kick somebody out. Then maybe in your life, you should also plan. Or maybe when you look at your day, you should, okay, we have a person who's, I don't know if anyone saw that, but there's a spoofer in the room. Okay. So yeah, just the whole point is uncertainty is not an excuse. That's what I mean to say. Okay, now let's get into it. What is GTD? It really comes down to these 5 phases. First is capture, then is clarify, then organize, then reflect, then engage. So core, if you want to make an analogy out of it. Some people say do for the last one, which I kind of prefer more. But it's basically we're going from one end of a funnel of like a bunch of possibilities down to interacting with the real world at the other end. Okay. And what I want to say before I go into any of these in detail is that this isn't something that David Allen invented. This is more like something he discovered. If you look at anyone who's creative, who gets a lot of things done, they do some form of this workflow, whether they know it or not. They start from this divergent state where there's a bunch of possibilities, and they start clarifying and filtering things down until they actually deal with one thing at a time at the end of it. That's it. GTD is just a way of articulating this process. So what exactly are these steps? Step 1, you capture everything you have to do in one place. Everything. This is like a big step for a lot of people. They think like, oh, like, can I just do my work stuff and then keep other stuff to me? No. Like empty your mind into one place. And we're going to get into this into a lot of detail. The next step is you clarify the outcomes you want with the next physical actions. And for those of you who were here last week, we got a taste of this. Next step is you organize all those tasks just they belong. Like, where are you going to use these things? Where do you need to see them? You put them in those places where they belong. So like folders, apps on your computer, etc. Then, and this is where the philosophers kick in, you need some system of reflection just to make sure that everything is on the right track. And then you're selecting which of these tasks you want to use or you want to deal with that week or that day. So you reflect on what tasks are appropriate for the current week, or you reflect on your system as a whole. And then once you've selected something for the day or for the week, you engage with it one at a time. It's very straightforward, and it's almost like when you say it like this, it starts to feel like common sense. And to be honest, I think it is. It's an example of uncommon common sense, or common sense that hasn't been codified. So let's get into the first three of these. I think this week we'll just have enough time for these, and then it'll be a good time to break and have a discussion and see how things are landing. And then we'll start to get into these two in the coming week. So before I launch into it, I just want to give a frame for understanding what these things are, okay? I think of each of these steps as a basic move, kind of like a chef has like a bunch of micro skills in order to make a good meal. One of those micro skills
to do everything that you're.
Sorry, we're going to keep everybody on mute for now. You need to have basically a series of micro skills that you can deploy whenever you're contending with the chaos of your work, of the information around you. So a chef, they have really good knife skills. A boxer, they have to practice, their right jab multiple times so that they can deploy that in a fight. Miyagi, that's like the classic analogy. So you start to internalize some of these fundamentals, and then they become a part of you and the way that you deal with the world. So to me, the thing that really summarizes this is this quote by Bruce Lee. He said, "Don't fear the man who knows 1,000 techniques, but fear the man that has practiced one technique 1,000 times." And to me, this shouldn't be daunting. This is just a reminder that, you're going to have to, do this a lot in order to internalize it. And I kind of want to, I guess, encourage you to stick with this. If this is interesting to you, stick with it until you get to a point where, say, capture, which we're going to get into next, is so practiced to you that you just do it automatically, because that's when GTD really shines. And honestly, I
don't really understand the quote.
All right, I'm going to remove this person. I made the mistake of posting this event on Twitter. I think that's the problem. Okay. Someone says they don't understand the quote, so I'm gonna specify this a little bit more. If you just practice 1,000 techniques once, then you're not going to be good at deploying them when you're in a fight. But if you practice one technique 1,000 times, it's going to be an intuitive part of you, so that your instincts can now deploy that technique when you're in the fight. And we're not fighting, but we're doing something that is still quite chaotic. Most of us have become knowledge workers, for better or for worse, which means that we have to deal with the most demanding, chaotic, schizophrenic information ecology that any human being has ever dealt with. And this is totally new to our generation, right? This is a new thing. So having these fundamentals, I think, really helps deal with that kind of chaos. All right, let's get into capture. So life is full of stuff. We alluded to this before. You have like stuff that you've written down in your notebook. You have like unread emails. You have actual physical mail. You have your bags that have all these things in it. You have receipts, and then you have this monstrosity, right? Hands up if you know what I'm talking about. Hands up if you're like a high tab life. Maybe not this bad, but most of us keep like a ton of Google tabs open, because it's there's like this vague sense that there's something important in there. There's a vague sense that maybe there's $1 billion business idea in one of these tabs somewhere, so I'm not going to close Chrome. And this taxes your computer's RAM, right? And you'll know your computer can't function properly if you have tabs like this. And what I want to suggest is that this is actually a perfect analogy for your own brain. We have a bunch of tabs like this in our own brain, a bunch of stuff, and it's taxing our RAM. And that's limiting our capacity to actually engage with the things that matter. So the whole point of this capture step is to close all the Google tabs of our mind and of all the other areas of our life and put them in one place where it's much easier to deal with. And there's two quotes that I think really summarize this. There's levels to it, but I want to get to the core. The first is that all of these are poorly managed internal commitments. Like whenever you keep a tab open on Google, there's a part of you that thinks, oh, maybe I'll do something with that. And that's an internal commitment. And as long, like the longer you don't do anything with that, the more like low level stress you start to develop because you're not in integrity with that internal commitment. It's more obvious if you make a commitment to someone and they're like waiting for something from you, you start to feel like this like stress. But because it's more obvious, it's more easy to deal with. The internal ones, they just build up for years. And you just have like, you just get used to it. You just get used to feeling like this heavy background anxiety. And so the answer to this is this other quote, which is, your mind is for having ideas, not holding them. What is good for holding ideas? Maybe if you have an answer, you can put in the chat. You know, a system basically, right? Like a notebook. Someone said bookmarks. I use an app, which I'm going to show you in a second. But the whole point of step one is to get out of that frame that most people live in. Like 99% of people, they're just holding everything in their head, or it's like kind of like ill-defined and spread out in all these different areas of their life. The capture step of GTD is just taking everything out of your head and putting it in like a sim. Actually, put it in one place. Just start there. So this is what we're going to do. We're going to just practice this for 5 minutes. And you know, if you have like a piece of paper in front of you, that's good. If you have like a Google Doc that you can open or a note, that works as well. And I'm just going to set a 5-minute timer, and almost like a guided meditation, I'm going to give everybody a series of prompts to start thinking about the different things, that different tabs that are open in your mind, and just put them down on a sheet of paper. And then we're going to use those in the next step. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen right now. If I can find the thing to do it. And I'm going to do a 5-minute timer starting now. And just, if things start coming to your mind, just write them down. But I'm going to start to listen to my voice. I'm just going to give you a few prompts. So the first prompt is your mind. What's worrying you right now that you haven't taken the time to identify as a project? What's taking more mental bandwidth than it deserves? Now, I want you to think about your creative opportunities. What would you like to learn or develop or start or launch or publish? What skills would you like to learn? Now, have a look at your physical environment. Look around your office or your room. What objects in your room do you identify as needing your attention? Maybe you have papers on your desk or something. You can also look at your desktop computer and see if there's any files on your desktop. Got like 2.5 minutes left. Now I want you to think of people that are important to you. You know, like your family, your partner, maybe a friend that you're involved in some kind of project with. Just bring these people to mind. Is there anything incomplete? Anything where you kind of feel like you're out of integrity with these people, and see if that brings up any tasks or any ideas. Okay, now think about think about anything that comes up when I say these words. Finances, home, health, social life, personal development, work, career. All right, we just got 50 seconds left. And if you're done, just write done in the chat. There's nothing more coming to mind. And then we'll bring it back. All right. So now that I got rid of the spammers, if anyone's comfortable, I'd love to hear just one or two examples of stuff that came up before I go to the next slide. Just feel free to raise your hand or just jump off mute.
Something that came up for me was just too many things. So under creative opportunities, I have like entire projects that are ill-formed and like I've never really thought them through, never really turned them into details. They've just been hanging for a long time. But under other categories, I have much more concrete things, which I think about more like the objects just in my space. They're very much like actionable, functional things that I would probably spend a lot more of my time actually engaging with and doing something with. But what came up for me was just how many of these things I don't really do anything about, like in line with what you were saying. I think that was maybe the idea with the prompt, but that definitely is what came out. Like a large list of people that I have some vague intention to shift my relationship to, but that vague intention has just been that vague intention for a long time. Yeah, that sort of stuff.
Yeah, that's very well put. Ron, do you want to share it as well?
Yeah, two biggies that came up. One is that having any system, organizational system itself, is itself a looming to-do over me. So it feels like a double energy drainer because I've been forever saying, get organized. And related to that, I have a lot of decluttering to do. So it's kind of like a looming overwhelm where I need the system to tackle stuff, but I can't get to the system without a system. So it feels a bit overwhelming.
Yeah, well, what I'd like to encourage you with is you're doing it right now. You just did it. And the whole idea that 5 minutes of action is worth more than 5 years of study. I really believe that, and that's why I kind of put these little practice opportunities throughout it, because you can get lost trying to figure out the best system. And really the most powerful thing is just to take some of these things and just start doing them, because naturally you can fall back on the practice. So yeah, I would encourage you that you already just took steps in the right direction. All right, so I'm gonna switch back to the slides. And I'm gonna show us all where this fits in with the broader GTD process. And this is, I thought this might be helpful to show because I'm somebody who really likes having the bird's eye view when I'm learning different details. But if you find this overwhelming, don't worry about it. This is just this is an old school framing of the GTD process. This is from the original book. If you were to take the time to go through each of these one by one, like you could do it. Like all of GTD could be represented by like dumbly following each of these steps in the flow chart. And we just did this, okay? We just took stuff and we put it in some sort of list. And that's captured. That's step one of the 5. Next, we're gonna do clarify, and clarify is a mixture of the stuff here and here, and a little bit of the stuff here. Actually, it's this stuff right here. But we're just going to move down this funnel. And if after this presentation you want like one thing to take away to start using GTD, I would say just print this out. I'll find the link and send it to you guys. And like, you know, a 13-year-old can just follow this. It's not that complicated. You just take one of those items one by one, and then you ask each of these questions. So we're going to take one of the items. So maybe look at your list and think about one item you want to play with for the next practice. And we're going to start talking about clarifying. So the key insight here is that you can't do a project. You can only do a physical action. And a lot of what you wrote down is probably a project. It's probably like 10 potential physical actions. You know, if you ever notice, you have something in your to-do list that like stays there for like 6 weeks, it's just like always there. It's probably because it's not a task, it's a project, and it probably needs to be clarified. There's a lot of research on procrastination, for instance, that procrastination is a reaction to ambiguity. It's like your mind being like, dude, I don't know what to do. Like, so I'm not going to do anything. So clarify is the step that solves that problem. If you start doing this like habitually, again, practice that one technique 1,000 times, then it'll transform the way you relate to the stuff that you just collected. So we did this last week. For those of you who are here, we did this exact exercise, and now you get another rep that you get to do. And some people call this a 3-column exercise. And it basically gives you a framework to clarify your tasks. So you would take something from the first step that we just wrote down, and then we're going to add these 2 ingredients to it. So the stuff goes here, and then we're going to do 2 things to one of the items on that list. So task is the stuff from step 1. The outcome is, what does done look like? Like, how do I know when this thing is done? And you'll notice that for some things, this is pretty easy, but for some things, you actually have to like seriously think about it. You have to be like, oh yeah, what do I want to do with this? Some of the relational stuff, I find, for me, it requires a bit of like time to figure out the outcome. But this is an important step. And until you do this, your psyche's not going to help you. Your psyche is just going to be like, hey, you need to clarify. And that's like that anxiety. It's just telling you that you need to clarify some stuff. So you take your time to clarify it. And it doesn't take that long. It's just people don't do it. It takes long enough that people don't naturally do it. And then I would say this is like, if you're like an overthinker, this is the most important piece. It's, what is the next physical action? Another way that I like to think about this is, what does my body need to do so that the world moves a little bit closer to that outcome? Keyword physical. Another way to think about this is, if you like John Vervaeke's stuff, we're taking our propositions and we're getting them right up to the edge of propositional knowing so that we can get procedural. Okay, we're taking the thoughts right to the edge and then making it as easy as possible to take an action on it. And that's why you have to put it in physical terms. And oh, what's that? I wonder where that goes. Well, the reason I put this is because to me, this is also like, what we're doing here is we're making decisions. You're taking this stuff and you're deciding, what do I want with this stuff? And then you're deciding what the next physical action is. And that's what's converting propositions, thoughts, concepts, ideas into action. That's like the the machinery. We've taken it out and we've created a system out of it so that we can repeat it. And it doesn't always work like this. Sometimes you intuitively do something, you intuitively see an outcome, and you intuitively know how to take a step towards it. Things in the physical world, they're like that. Like if I gave you a potato and I asked you to cook it, you'd first be like, wait, how does he want it cooked? Does he want it like boiled? Does he want to chop it up and roast it? Like, what is the end product in mind? And then you would like grab the knife and you'd start doing it. And it's like very straightforward. You don't have to do 3 columns. But in the information world, in the knowledge worker world, you're not dealing with potatoes. You're not dealing with physical things, right? So it helps to introduce this frame on top of it. So we're going to do this again. We're going to do the 3-column exercise with one of the items from the list that you took before. And here, let me just leave this slide up, and I'm going to set a 5-minute timer again, and just take one item from your previous list, put it down with 1 column. I mean, you could do this like with bullet points on a Google Doc too. And then all you have to do is write an outcome for what done looks like, and then the next physical action. And I'm going to set a timer right now. But if you finish before time's up, just let me know. Just put done in the chat, and then we'll move to the next thing. All right, we got 1 minute left. All right, first done coming in. Does anyone feel stuck? Okay, so I have a few examples about how to think about this next physical action. But if anybody wants to share any of their own, or if they had any interesting observations, now would be a good time to do so. If not, I can move on. John?
I'm finding the statement of the task to be at times challenging, because for me, it sometimes opens up a whole collection of subtasks that's involved with that task. And the questioning for me is, how simple should that proposition of the task be? Or should I start off with something that is at a higher level and then do what I'm doing and creating subtasks under that umbrella?
So if I understand you correctly, you're saying this column you're having some difficulty with.
For certain things, not all.
Yeah.
There's something that feels really big.
Yeah. So this is a good question. I would say, as a general principle, when you're in the capture phase, you write the task in whatever way it shows up. So if it shows up as one word, if it shows up as like this big thing, that's fine. When we're capturing, we're just capturing. We don't think about if we captured it in a good way. Then when you get to the clarify step, one thing that you'll notice is, as you start to write down the outcomes and stuff, a bunch of those things would need to break down into like 3 different projects. And I think that's what you're finding. You're finding there's a couple of your items that they're actually like more than one thing. And that's normal. And what I'll say is, the more you do these things deliberately, like you capture, you're in one mode, you clarify, you're in another mode, over time, they start to blur a little bit. So now when I capture tasks, I write them with next physical actions automatically. But that's because I've done this so many times. So the reps, I just had so many reps. There's still some things that are a little more psychologically challenging, and I'll notice they'll come up like vague. But the best way to practice is, this is almost like you're doing your scales on the piano, right? Like you're learning your C major scale until it's like totally in your hand, and then at the end we're going to become like jazz piano players. It's something like that. So yeah, it's a very good question. When it comes out, when you're just capturing it, right in the way that it comes up. When you're clarifying it, you might need to break things down a bit.
Cool, thanks.
Yeah. Okay, there's one more question in the chat. I think if the task has been done before and needs to be done again, it's okay to make assumptions about what the task entails. Is that, Nathan, is that a question, or is there a response to something from above that I missed? Okay, cool. All right, so I'm gonna show some examples just to help with the pattern matching of next physical actions. And I know we got like 10 minutes left, so we'll see how far we get in the next section. Okay, so this is just a good way to like think about this. A lot of people, they write stuff down with these types of verbs, and this trips them up, especially if you write something on a Sunday and you write send or you write complete, and then you have to action it on a Wednesday, and you don't really know what complete means. The whole idea with next physical actions is to build the habit of thinking like this. So what do you mean send? Are you going to email? Are you going to text? Are you going to send a Slack message? And you start to see like, okay, a lot of these things actually have like very concrete counterparts. So complete might be right. Decide if it's like a big decision. I don't know, one way I like to make decisions is listing pros and cons. That's a very different project than just decide, right? Thinking about things, this is a big one. I'll never put an item down that says think about. Because if you really need to think about it, then you got to journal, at least for me, that's how I do it. And then this last one I think is a very interesting one. This seems kind of tangible, right? We're fixing a car, but a lot of the things you'll realize when you look at that stuff list, you don't actually know how to do this, right? Like, I don't know how to fix a car. So for me, fixing the car, it's like, that's what I want to get done. I want the car to be fixed. But in order to get it fixed, I need to get a mechanic, and oh, I don't have a mechanic. So the next action turns out to be text Steve for his mechanic's number, which feels so different from this one. And that's the thing that trips a lot of people up. The way things enter our mind, it's usually this form, but the clarify step helps us get it into this form, just so we can get that much closer to the action realm of things. Okay, so the next section is organize. But I think I'm going to pause here because organize is a bit of a heavy lift. Maybe, okay, I'll tease it, but we won't get into it in too much detail. And then I think I'd like to give some time for questions. Organize is about answering this question about where do I put this stuff? And we'll pick this up next week. But it's basically when you have all these things, all the stuff that you've now clarified, ranging from email to, a stoner thought, or like you read something about civilizational collapse and like now it's a thing, you got to do something about it. Organize is like all the stuff that you've clarified now needs to go somewhere. It needs to go in a bucket. And at high level, you got your task managers, you got your notes app, you got your calendar, you got your read later app. And we'll get into all the details about how to use this next week. So I'll leave it on that cliffhanger. And I'm actually, before we go into questions, there's just a couple things I want to plug while I have everybody. So if you're looking at this stuff and you're thinking, okay, there's all these practices, and I know if I did them all, like if I wrote the next physical action, if I captured everything, my life would be better. But the hard part is actually the doing. Like, how do I even like download these practices? That's something that Peter and I have been working on for the last like year and a half. And some of you know this. In fact, we have a couple people in the room who've taken this program with us. We're doing this thing again in August. It's called Beyond Self-Discipline. And it's really about this thing of like solving the ecology of practice problem. It's like, how do you set up your life in a way in a 2-week period so that all of these practices that you want to do, you actually do them. And it's built around this idea: don't explain your philosophy, embody it. So we haven't announced this yet, but I thought I'd mention it to this group here. Next week there's going to be a proper announcement at the STOA. But if this is something you're interested in, then you can find out more at the website, which I'll share in the chat. And then the second thing I wanted to plug is that, so I do productivity coaching for executives. And this is something that like people tend to pay quite a lot of money for because they can afford it and they're trying to like get super productive. But I was talking to Peter and I thought it might be a good idea to just offer like a gift economy version of this to you guys and then the people in the STOA. I feel like these sessions will be valuable for me because I prefer to work with people where I'm exploring some of these more meta concepts. And I think they'll be very valuable to you because usually this is something that is quite like cost prohibitive. So this link, it has all the details about it, and I'll put in the chat, and it's all in the gift economy. And if you don't know what that means, there's a little blurb about that as well. But I have a few slots available for people who want to have any kind of one-on-one work with me about this stuff related to productivity. So those are the plugs. And now I'll stop sharing and we'll leave some time for questions.